Hey, everybody, welcome to a very rare Shacknews podcast in a very rare circumstance. TJ Denzer joins me today. I am long reads editor here at Shacknews, David L. Craddock, and TJ and I are here to talk about Resident Evil 4. Not the one from 2005, although I'm sure it will come up often, but the remake, which TJ had the pleasure, and I think it was a pleasure, TJ, after reading your review, of reviewing here at Shacknews, and it received the website's first 10 out of 10 score, which is a pretty big deal. And we'll talk about that. But TJ, why don't you set this up for us? What did Resident Evil 4 mean to you, and what were your expectations going into the latest Resident Evil remake, the third in almost as many years from Capcom?
There was kind of a sense the moment that Resident Evil 4 a remake was announced that, like, what are they improving upon with this remake? Because that game is already incredible. The original Resident Evil 4 was like a new chapter in games. Like, all of games. Not just Resident Evil, but like all of games. It subverted the usual formula that they had been using for like 5 mainline games before that, and it moved and it offered like this action experience that we really hadn't seen on the level that it presented, while also being scary and terrifying. And I think to say that, like, it is one of the greatest games of all time, even outside of the Resident Evil franchise, is like that's just accepted amongst a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you talk about foundational games, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Super Mario Brothers, Tetris, Street Fighter 2, Doom, Resident Evil 4 has to come up because it was as foundational to the evolution of 3D games as I would say Super Mario 64 and Zelda Ocarina of Time. So I don't know about you. I love the Resident Evil franchise. We both do, and I love RE4. And even though it's not a perfect game, what is? I was still thinking, like, this isn't just a remake of a Resident Evil game. This is a remake of one of the most important games of all time. Like, you've already built the Taj Mahal. How are you going to do better than that, right? And that's kind of a lot of what we got into. I was playing it mostly on the PC while you were reviewing it on PS5, and I was bowled away at almost every turn. Like, it seemed like Capcom knew exactly the challenge they faced, and they could have slavishly adhered to the original, right? Like, they could have given RE4 an RE engine coat of paint and released it, and that would have been like fine. But they actually dared to go above and beyond a classic. Like, almost at every turn, I was fixated on this game. I could not get it out of my head, and I still can't. I started professional, a replay of professional mode this morning. I mean, what were some of the really standout experiences, or maybe the moment where you were like, this is something special? This is not just your usual remake.
When you first enter the village where the infamous mob fight scenes starts, and you have an option of like not engaging them directly right away. You have an option of like skirting and taking out like stragglers on the outskirts of the village, the huts. Like, stealth and the knife combat were huge clicking points for me with this. You had the option to strategize around the fight before it even begins, and begin to like put the pieces in play for your own success. And then those plans all fall apart once the actual mob comes. Because, like, and that's a thing, right? Like, it subverted my experience right from the get-go, because there were always a lot of villagers coming at you in that mob fight. But
Yeah.
I constantly felt threatened on all sides in a way I didn't feel in the original.
It was overwhelming. Like, they just have masses of villagers coming at you, not even like in a big herd. They're flanking you, like they're moving around buildings. Like, everywhere I turned, there were at least 2 or 3 villagers like, hey, we thought you might come back here. Welcome to the party, And Yeah, it was overwhelming. And also, I think you hit on a really good point. Like, you can go into the mob right away, or you can use stealth, which the game hasn't even really like introduced in a tutorial pop up yet. But if you know to use it, you can. And the interesting thing is the fact that you will eventually be caught. Like, you can't get out of that scenario without inciting the mob and surviving for it feels like 10 minutes, but it's probably more like 5 or something. But the game is telling you, like, you're going to be able to do both here. There will be stealth moments, and there will be moments when you're just going to have to, like, spray and pray almost. I mean, you got to be more tactical, but that you're going to feel like, oh, I've just got to mow everything down. It's that overwhelming.
How panicked did you get when a villager grabbed you from behind for the first time and turned you towards the chainsaw guy?
Oh man, I was like, are you kidding? Like, they're working together? That's not cool. Yeah, that was just one layer to this. And I also love, like, when you're grabbed from behind and you break the hold, you kind of like almost judo flip them over, and it's functional because you're not just breaking free, you're tossing that ganado, that not zombie as we used to call them in RE4 Classic, into the guys in front of you. So you're buying yourself some space too. It's a really functional mechanic, and I really like it.
I think it's really funny that that was a debate for so many years, but I think in the remake they even call them zombies at one point or another.
I think Leon does, because like that's his point of reference, right? He's like, uh-oh, Raccoon City, but in a village. Like, this isn't good. Yeah, I really love just talking to encounters. You and I were texting several days this week, often late into the night / early into the morning. And we found that we were each approaching encounters, even boss fights, but also just normal enemy encounters in completely different ways. And it felt like the original RE4 allowed for that possibility in terms of like how quote unquote arenas were designed, but there weren't nearly as many tools available to you, especially the knife. The knife plays such a different role in the remake.
Yeah, parries are a game changer. Like, the ability to just negate an attack and make space is huge. And then there's the fact that you can completely eliminate an enemy from the fray if you get a hold of them before they even see you. Or you can stop a Plagas from transforming if you knock them to the ground and go for the strike.
Yeah, I think they have. I don't know how much we can talk about this, but like that is crucial, right? Like, no matter what else is going on, if a zombie hits the ground and they start writhing, you want to get up there and finish them off with a knife, because if you ignore them, or you treat another threat as more serious, you're gonna have a bigger problem on your hands in a matter of seconds.
And it's such a tense moment because like sometimes you see the guy writhing on the ground, but you'll see like 3 other dudes moving around, moving in on you past that guy. It's like, oh no, I gotta deal with these guys, and I gotta get to that guy, or else. And it just, the level of tension that the game keeps up with. That was always a thing about Resident Evil 4. Is like I've gone on record a few times to say that I hate when a game makes you an armory by the end and makes the threats feel meaningless.
Yep.
The beauty of Resident Evil 4 is that Leon comes in already like a secret agent, and the threat just continues to grow and grow and grow beyond his resources. And to the point where, like, even like in the third act of the game, I still feel like I'm scrambling to get just enough gunpowder to make some shotgun shells or rifle shells. It's intense all the time.
It is. That brings me to another of my favorite points about this game. 2 points, actually. First of all, I love that they kept the inventory Tetris layout of the attaché case while also letting you, quick switch up to, like, I think it's like 8 weapons, different presses of the D-pad or the keyboard keys, so that you have that combination of the much more tense in-battle weapon switching, which has been a thing in Resident Evil since 5. But you can also, like, if you need a break, if you just need to, like, take stock of your tools, you can open that inventory case. You don't even have to manually sort anymore. There's an auto sort button, or you can manually sort if you know exactly what space you want to, how much space you need to make room for.
I let it auto sort for me exactly one time, and
yeah,
and it wasn't even that I thought it did a bad job. It's that I have a method, and I feel like I do it better.
I have a method too. I always keep, like, my healing items are on the right, my guns are at the top, my ammo's at the bottom. Like, I have my system. But I like that the RE4 remake virtual attaché assistant will step in if needed. But also, like, I like stealth in this game because I think you and I play a lot of games, obviously, in our roles. But the one thing I hate is when a game introduces stealth and then immediately makes it look like a meaningless option. I love the Tomb Raider 2013, the beginning of that origin story for Lara Croft. And I'm a big stealth fan. So they give me a bow, I'm going to use the bow. But then almost immediately, they're putting me up against dudes that are armed to the teeth. It's almost like they're saying, like, well, why would you even bother with the bow? In this game, stealth remains, it's not viable in every counter, but it's viable in many of them, even most, all the way through the end of the game. And I feel like from beginning to end, everything I learned in this game came in handy. Nothing ever became outdated. Any tactic you can use from beginning to end, and you feel a growth because of that.
And there are options for just about everything. Like, even the most stealth-centric options, which I consider to be the knife and the bolt thrower, have options for full-on engagements. Like, we talked about this, David. There is... The cabin fight happens, and you didn't have the bolt thrower, but I did. And I had crafted mines that, like... this gun is the new mine thrower. You can set mines on a bolt and launch them into the ground, and then if any enemies walk in proximity to them, it blows up and kills them. Or you can stick an enemy with them, and they turn into a living bomb in the middle of a crowd. It is so great for clearing space with small fry.
You discussing your strategy for clearing the cabin ambush using the bolt thrower made me go, oh, it's the new mine thrower too. Oh, it's the new mine thrower, because that's a weapon I completely ignored in RE4 Classic. But the multifunctionality of it here is really cool, and I feel that way about a lot of the weapons. Not that they can, like, literally have a second form, but just the way that, I mean, you and I divided up weapons for various reasons, and because of that, we were constantly surprised at how we did encounters versus how the other player did encounters. And I think a lot of people will experience that, especially if they're going through the story with a friend, comparing and contrasting favorite weapons, favorite upgrades, favorite moments, favorite combat strategies. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And I was going to do a little bit of detail about just like the minute changes to narrative without giving too much away, of course. But I think a common thread between our conversations while going through this game is that the changes that they made to the game addressed gripes that Resident Evil fans had for years about the original Resident Evil 4. As we said, it's a wonderful game, like an amazing game, a masterpiece, but it's not perfect. There are things about it that did not age well, or just didn't make much sense in the first place. And I dare say that if there is a common criticism you've heard about the original Resident Evil 4, it's addressed in the remake. Consistently.
Yeah, I have to say that, like, when I rolled credits on that game, I was a little emotional because I felt like I'd seen actual characters go through arcs, learn, develop, grow. And in RE4, I think one of the major sticking points, and this didn't affect enjoyment of the game itself. It was a popcorn action flick, right? It was great at that. But there weren't really characters in that game, aside from Leon, who was really just a one-liner machine. And he was great with that. But here, I mean, Ashley, Luis, even the merchant, he kind of expresses his character through the blue request notes, which I think are hysterical. Like, that guy has some trauma in his past related to blue medallions because he hates them, TJ. They just make him, like, irrationally angry, but that made me laugh. Like, even the merchant has layers. I also like his line, while you're in the merchant shop interface, he'll just talk with you, and occasionally he'll go, "Oh, back's killing me. Age hasn't been kind to us, I suppose," which I almost took as Capcom saying, like, RE4 was great, but it has aged, so let's redo everything.
If you linger on the merchant's menu for too long, he'll get really mad at you.
For, like, loitering, basically? I haven't heard that. It's great.
He'll, like, drop lines like, "Time is money, stranger."
Yeah, I love him. Like again, they took someone who was really just the personification of an interface
Hmm.
and made him more of a person. Like I love that he's still shrouded in mystery, but something else we were talking about is normally like the lore in Resident Evil, again, it's just popcorn fun. Like you can talk about favorite characters and moments, but in this game, every character, every setting has so much more of a dimension to it. You learn little details about the origins of different monsters, of different characters, about the Las Plagas virus, and what it kind of, because this is a remake, and if you're not coming to it for the first time, you kind of know what came before and what will come after, and it weaves these elements together in a way that makes for a like a genuinely enjoyable and cohesive narrative. Which cohesive and narrative is not cohesive is not an adjective we often use for Resident Evil games, and that was always fine. But here, it really, really works in the game's favor.
We were talking about this. Is that there's a boss in the game that I won't give away that doesn't really have much beyond their surface function in the original. And in this game, they not only have files and journals related to them, but they also have like background. They also have like background noise in the scenery where you can see. And once you see like just the depths of what happened, and the realization sinks in, they become a far more demented and intense being.
Yeah, I would agree. There are also like there are characters you love to love and characters you love to hate here. Like again, alluding to another boss, there was someone that you and I could not wait to get our hands on for things they do over the course of the story, and it was a very satisfying boss fight when it happened. I also feel like the areas themselves in Resident Evil 4 have kind of always been characters in a way because there are three settings, one for each act, the village, the castle, the island. And the castle has always been my favorite. I just loved the atmosphere. I loved the zealots. And the castle, I think, was one of the most interesting because it might have been one of the most subversive. Like there were a lot of areas that it felt like Capcom intentionally reordered so that you wouldn't always know, like, oh, I'm going from here and then I'll go here and then I'll go here. Whereas the village I felt was probably the most intact but fleshed out. Like the lake is not just a boss fight arena and a single cave where you can go to get a treasure. It feels like almost the hub of the village now. What were your thoughts on some of the areas themselves?
I really enjoyed them. Like I liked that they did away with with some areas that like didn't make much sense to me in the original. I want to I want to stay vague about it, but like there are some spots in the original that basically serve as little more than traps.
Yeah.
And those areas are either done away with or reworked into more sensible and fun exploratory moments.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes to mind is the way that you get the key to get the church to get into the church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a much more involved process. That not only has you fighting against enemies, but also paying attention to your environment very carefully. And it's not the first time I've seen a puzzle like that, but it is a good shift into something more interesting that works better, in my opinion, in this game.
Yeah, and it also makes sense within the narrative because given the role that everyone from the villagers to the zealots to the mercenaries on the island play in kind of guarding the Las Plagas, it makes sense that it would be more involved for anyone to get anywhere close to the truth about the Las Plagas and its secrets, but also like that. Okay, in Resident Evil 1, right? The Spencer estate, you're like, no, let's actually talk about RE2's RPD. Like, that is not a very functional police station. And in the original game, there were just a few notes like, wow, the chief sure is crazy. He's got all these puzzle doors. What's up with that guy? It's just kind of like a joke, like a cursory mention because Capcom knew people would ask about it. But here it feels functional. Like, there are all these puzzles guarding elements of Las Plagas or things connected to Las Plagas, because nothing with a brain, meaning nothing that's not infected with the parasite, they want it to be difficult for people to get a hold of this stuff. But it also fleshes out the village itself. Like there's a cave system in one of the areas that doesn't feel like filler for the sake of, you know, adding on an hour's worth of exploration. It feels like a natural extension of the area from which it stems. The world just feels bigger. And that's something that I feel like the Resident Evil remakes have always done. Like from the extra rooms and corridors and the wooded area of Resident Evil 1 remake, none of that felt bolted on. It felt very organic. And that's how all of the additions to the RE4 remakes terrain felt here to me.
Yeah. I think like this is visually, this game is just like such a awesome, like I thought they couldn't get better than burger physics in Resident Evil 2, but because those were some impressive burger physics.
Oh, my mouth is watering just thinking about those burger physics.
But like everything in this game is spruced up and detailed and reworked out to a degree that's like, it's fun to just, I don't feel like running through this game. I feel like walking and looking at everything at all times. Because not only are you like taking in a refreshed, like modern graphical take at everything that's in Resident Evil 4, but there are Easter eggs hidden just about everywhere.
Yeah, I found little nods to past games, even to future games, which, you know, what makes this fun is we don't know whether that's Capcom saying, hey, we might be doing this next, or hey, this is how it all connects, or it might just be like thing that they threw in just because, you know, it's a little bit of fan service. But I'm with you. I really savored my first playthrough, and one part of that comes in the form of an addition, which is the side quests, these requests from the merchant, which you don't have to do, but it behooves you to do them. I love that I had more reason to go through these areas, whereas, you know, there was some backtracking in RE4, but it felt like once you'd gone through an area, some areas once, then maybe twice, like you were done and it was on to the next set piece. Here, it just, I feel like in Resident Evil games, like the Spencer Estate, the RPD, they felt like characters. And if you do these side quests and you become more familiar with the layout of these areas, they just take on more depth and more meaning and just become more familiar to you. And I really liked that aspect of the remake.
For sure. Like, this can be mentioned because it was something from an interview that I did with, that we did with the Resident Evil staff. But, like, back when Krauser hadn't been reintroduced yet, I talked to I think one of the associate producers about him a little bit. And one of the things they brought up is that this remake benefits from the fact that they've had so much time to build out the lore of certain characters. And Krauser is among them, because like he had a huge expansion of lore in one of the light gun shooters. It was Resident Evil, I think, the Dark Side Chronicles. You actually have a mission specifically with Leon and Krauser. And I, at the time, wondered what they would do with that. But when I see like how Krauser played out in the game now, it makes so much sense. And it's such a good use of what like games that came after Resident Evil 4 added to it.
Yeah, I think Krauser was definitely a major sticking point for most fans. I think the island had a lot of sticking points. It was the source of a lot of issues with RE4 2005. I know we can talk about this because they announced it, but first of all, like Krauser is so interesting from a gameplay perspective because the QTE knife fight is gone. It's an actual battle with knives now. And as a Dark Souls fan, TJ, I don't know about you, but I reveled in that boss fight. Like, it was so fun. I felt like I'd been training for it since the original Demon Souls in 2009. But also, like, Krauser, what always annoyed me about him is he felt bolted on. He felt like an exposition dump, and he just seemed dumb. Like, there's one point where he's just like vomiting plot details to Leon in the original game, and out of the blue he goes, all for Umbrella's sake. And of course, Leon's going to pick up on this word. He's like, Umbrella. And Krauser goes, almost let it slip. And I'm like, how? I didn't prompt you for this. You're just talking. You have no filter. You are the worst henchman ever. But in this, he is very developed. He feels like part of the plot, a natural part of the plot. And I feel like every character got that treatment. But I was most impressed with Krauser because, again, of all the issues people had with him back in 2005.
We do got to talk about Ashley, though, because she
Yes.
is so much better in this game.
She's a character. She's a person now, right? That's the big takeaway.
Yeah, like Ashley. I'm among those that always believed that Ashley was a chore. She didn't have much function beyond being a chore that you had to protect,
Yes.
and move from place to place,
Mm-hmm.
and that was unfortunate. That was an unfortunate, I think. I want to say limitation of the first game is that like they just didn't give more to her. Here you still have to look after her. Like she is a failing condition of the game.
Yeah. Much more balanced though, right? And I want to get more into that, but yeah, please continue because you're spot on.
But like by first off giving you the option to have her follow you like 3 feet away or follow you like 15 feet back, that is immensely helpful.
Right.
and then B, as the game progresses, Ashley becomes more confident. She becomes more courageous. And in time, she starts helping Leon without prompts and doing things on her own, whether it's like calling out a hedge, like cheering him on a shot he made, or like moving towards an area and be like, what about this? Or just like when like it's funny too because like there are moments where she does something and she pats herself on the back. It's like, I'm getting pretty good at this, right? And I'm like, yes you are, you're awesome.
Yeah, she has a character arc, and I love that. She felt like a person, and what I mean was, like, again, so many people. I felt she was a tolerable chore. Tolerable because there were 2 big drawbacks to Capcom wanting you to feel urgent in keeping her safe. Right. One was that, especially in the village, there were dumpsters almost anywhere, so you could just say, Ashley, get in the dumpster, and she wasn't even like a factor during fights. The second problem was there were actually zones in RE4 Classic. And as long as you didn't move into a new zone without Ashley, you could clear a room, keep her there, and then she wasn't a factor while you went elsewhere and just mopped up all the enemies. Here, you cannot leave her behind. It's like you said, you have either 2 options. She follows you closely or she follows you from a distance. But she's always with you, so you have to think about her constantly now. You can't just kind of negate the part of the game that requires you to keep her safe. But the second thing is that she really does a great job or Capcom did a really great job at changing what happens to her if she's hurt, right? Like in the original, she had her own health bar, and you could upgrade Leon's health or Ashley's, but you never really wanted to upgrade Ashley's because the max HP upgrades were rare enough that Leon was the priority, and then they also sold for enough that, like, why would I waste this on Ashley when I could get some more pesetas? But here she's either incapacitated or she's dead, and enemies don't go out of their way to kill her like they did in the original game, which was another kind of disconnect in the plot. Like, they want Ashley safe, they need to use her in her plot, so why would they try to kill her? But that actually works because while she's incapacitated, enemies, I don't even know if they'll try to pick her up. I don't remember seeing that. But whether they do or not, all you do is while she's down, you can just help her up. Or if you're too busy fighting, she'll stay down wherever she was down. And she won't die after like 10 seconds. It's not a revival mechanic, but it's kind of a middle ground between like her being completely safe and also her following you. So I thought that was a really cool wrinkle. Ashley in general now is just a lot more helpful and more 3-dimensional as a character, and I really she's an early front runner for me for favorite character of the year, honestly.
They will try to grab her and pick her up when she's incapacitated, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I used her as a decoy to kill a lot of enemies in this game. leading to my one of my few qualms about the game is aim is very difficult in this one. Like at the start, it's very difficult because like laser pointers are gone. They got rid of them. You don't get to just have a laser pointer on a shotgun or a rifle anymore. That's not something that happens. So you actually have crosshairs, and there is like the crosshair pieces like zoom in if you can keep your aim steady for a second. But man, it feels like there is some RNG on some of those weapons on whether or not you'll hit the shot or not. And I am embarrassed to admit how many times an enemy picked up Ashley, and I was like, oh, better take care of them. And oops, I shot Ashley. Game over. Start again.
Yeah, that's one of those areas where you and I had different experiences. I didn't hit her nearly as often, although that did happen to me. And it actually, our conversations about that, and I think that's a valid complaint. And our conversations about that got me thinking about the fascinating role the laser pointer played in each of Resident Evil 4's incarnations. Like in 2005, the reason every gun had a laser pointer was because third-person action games were still relatively new. They hadn't been codified yet. And so the laser pointer was like, here's where you're aiming generally. But now it's, you can get a laser pointer for certain guns, and it helps your aim. It definitely makes it more precise, not 100%, but more. And it just got me thinking that, like, Capcom basically knew, like, okay, people understand third-person games now, so how can we make the laser pointer functional in a different way rather than as a helpful, like a guiding hand, like it was in 2005 before this was really like a normal thing. And it's just fascinating to see the different ways this has evolved because of all the knowledge Capcom brought to this game and still managed to improve on it as vastly as they did.
And like it makes attachments and weapon upgrades in this game all the more meaningful because the more you upgrade your weapon, or if you find like the stock for the Red 9, that's I'll go ahead and say that's back. And I mean, that's the game changer. That's the point at which I am like, oh, thank goodness, now I can hit my shots more consistently. And and like you mentioned, you can get a laser pointer and put it on a couple of the guns, and it does make a difference. And like. And I have to admit, like, there are accessibility options. There are a lot of good accessibility options in this game, both from a gameplay and a visual standpoint. Like, there's a lot of brightness and color correction and color blindness and other features like subtitles, size of subtitles, colors of subtitles, closed captioning, and then we get into stuff like mechanical, and that leads us to aim snapping or aim assist. And not only do you have aim assist, but you have like degrees of aim assist, where the lightest version of it will snap to an enemy. A heavier version of it will follow the enemy as they move. And there's even like a toggle, like an actual slider that adjusts the degree to which the cursor will follow them. And I think that's cool. I think that's great that for someone like that doesn't want to put up with the stress of not hitting a shot, there is an option to make things easier for you.
It really does feel like Capcom was up to snuff on accessibility, and not just the usual ones you would assume, right? But like, I'm glad, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I have to just throw this out. Like, I'm glad accessibility options, deep accessibility options, are becoming more and more common, especially in AAA games that a lot of people are going to want to play.
Yeah, and so like even the qualms that I have about this game are addressed by options within the game, whether it's through gear that you pick up or simply by going to accessibility and toggling some things to make the experience better for yourself.
Yeah, that's something you said. Like you said, it makes a difference, right? And I was thinking, like, it actually makes a difference in several ways. That adding like a laser pointer not only makes a difference in the precision of that weapon specifically, but also in the weapon you might choose. Like I used the pistol with the laser sight. Does the Red 9 stock have a laser pointer, or is it just, it's the same function, right? It makes it more precise.
It makes the crosshairs narrow in much faster.
it really does make a difference, not only in terms of that weapon's functionality with the attachment on, but in the weapon you may choose to use. Like you and I use different handguns, for example, and might have had some different experiences because of that.
Yeah, and meanwhile, like I didn't really touch submachine guns that much in this game because of any weapon in the game, those ones like they're insane to control. If an enemy is point blank in your face, then you annihilate them. But a shotgun will do that too. So
yeah. No, you're right. There were a few submachine guns. I stuck with the TMP, maybe more of familiarity, and also because, like, again, you and I were dividing up weapons for specific article purposes, and so I stuck with what I had. But there are just a bevy of options, and every gun will feel different or different enough that when you replay this game, and I have a feeling that we both will and other players will, you're probably going to want to experiment with different weapons now to see how that changes the game. And it changes it in more ways than I think RE4's classic arsenals did.
For sure. Like, one of the things I was mentioning before about the bolt thrower, you can collect your ammo from that gun once you kill an enemy with it. If you don't have a mine attached to the bolt, then you can just use it as a crossbow. It makes for a good silent ranged option because it doesn't make sound. And B, being able to kill enemies and pick up your ammo and kill more enemies makes a big difference in saving ammo when you want to save ammo desperately. I love that gun. It's it's not the most useful gun in the game, but it introduced such an interesting wrinkle to my armament that I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go without it.
I think that's valid, right? Like, I don't think every gun is like a min-max type of situation. Like, I've already, ever since you told me how you used bolt thrower in certain scenarios, I've been thinking like, okay, when I get it, I'm gonna upgrade it this way, and it's going to be for that purpose. And like, I love that the guns have those wrinkles to them.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the last things I want to touch on, as far as just like how good this game was how did you feel about any certain things that maybe didn't make it to this remake?
There was one piece of content in particular that that didn't make it, but I didn't miss it because I felt like up to that point, everything I'd seen that was different or moved or rearranged or what have you was done so smartly that I trusted Capcom to make that choice, and I felt it was all for the best. Like I said, I felt like in the original RE4 Classic, as much as I loved it, it is one of my favorite games. I replay it probably on average every year. And there is, even then, still a certain point where I feel like the game starts to wear out its welcome. It was dragging. I never felt like that this time. And so I feel like everything they did decide to include in any form worked really well. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was of a similar mind where, like, I recognized the scenery of where that section that got cut should be. They put an entirely different encounter there. And they made that, and that encounter is one of the best parts of the whole game, in my opinion. Like, it's intense, it's upsetting, it's really like tough. It's a skill check.
Yes.
It tests how much you've been paying attention on certain levels, and I just think that, like, if that's what they decided to do, I don't even miss that. Like, I barely, like, by the time I was done with the game, I was like, oh yeah, I guess they didn't have that in there. But, like, I didn't even notice because I had such a good time and everything, like, fit together in such a way that I didn't hurt for that thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that especially if you look at the RE3 remake, I guess I was in a minority, but I felt like the cuts they made there were smart because it made for a tighter focus on Jill and Nemesis's relationship, if you will. But, I understand some people were upset by that. I don't think people will be upset here because I think, as we've said, everything that is there is so smartly done, and most of it is there. Honestly, it's just it might take a different form or be in a different area than you remember, but I think it's really smart. Before we get into final thoughts and the game's score and your thought process in that, TJ, I want to do an RE4 Classic transition and bring in video editor Greg Burke to join our conversation because he's a big RE4 fan as well. So we'll be right back.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
All right, Resident Evil 4 Classic transition over. We are back. We are TJ Denzer, senior news editor, and David O'Craddock, long reads editor during the month or two of the year I'm around, and Gregory Burke, video editor, who's fresh out of the video mines. He cleaned up, wiped up all that video coal dust to join us here today.
There's always
Thank
more
you,
coal in the video mines.
Always, always, always. So TJ and I have been just gushing about Resident Evil 4 Remake, and we wanted to bring you in because Resident Evil 4 is one of your favorite installments in the franchise as well, right?
Oh yeah, like you guys have said it countless times over the last several months. It's the game that redefined the whole genre for what Capcom had been doing for the past decade.
Yeah, so I mean, TJ and I have kind of covered, you know, speaking in vague terms, so we don't spoil anything for everybody, like what you can expect, and we just wondered if you had what you were looking forward to in this remake, what you're hoping for, and maybe what we could tell you about it.
The biggest thing that I am interested in is knowing like how, because the thing that they changed the most in 2 and 3, the remakes, had been the overall game length, like how long it takes to actually get through the story without like 100% in it, like your normal pacing playthrough, because it seemed they've slashed it in half, which I thought at first for 3 was a bad thing, but then I realized it's not a bad thing, right?
I actually have a final count on how long it took me to roll credits. My final count on my playthrough, and this is with me kind of like scouring and trying to find
figuring stuff out for the first time,
and also looking around a lot and observing the scenery, like chewing on the scenery. I ended up at 24 hours and 4 minutes.
That's pretty close. The original, I remember, took me 30 to beat. That's pretty close to the original. Like that's something, because it was a big game.
Yeah, there's a lot. There are a lot of like side quests in this that are really fun. I did most of those. It took me around 16 hours. The difference between my playthrough and TJ's was that I started on PS5 and then we got a review code for the PC since I'm writing impressions on that, and jumped into that version. And like I knew like almost half of the game, kind of restarting it there. But this is a really good playthrough, and as TJ and I were saying, you're going to want to savor this because the environments are just gorgeous, and there's so much to find, so much to do, like side quests, main quests. There's so much to see and do here. I think RE fans will be really happy with it. And then we say this, and within like 2 weeks, speedrunners will probably be like, world's best, 47 minutes or something. But
yeah, I mean, that was the case with all the games. Like you could, maybe the first Resident Evil game took me like 60 hours to beat because you get lost, trying to figure out stuff, but like then when you know the puzzle, the answers, you race through it. And what's like an S rank or like the fastest rank for Resident Evil 1? It's like 30 minutes or something, isn't it?
I think it's like an hour or something.
Oh,
yeah. It's really short.
Yeah, it's short, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It's short, but that's not going to be your first playthrough. Like,
right.
The thing is, these games were made with replay value in mind. And TJ and I have both. We haven't had a ton of time to jump into New Game Plus, but we've dabbled in it. And there are enough changes and unlockables, I say, that you're going to want to jump right back into this game once you finish it and try all the new stuff.
How's the I know you guys can't talk specifics. How's the weapon variety? That was one thing that I thought 4 did really well, was give you lots of fun different weapons that all did slightly different things. Like the sniper rifle was huge for the series in that game.
David and I had entirely different experiences with combat encounters because of the difference in weapons that we took. Like, I've always been a huge fan of the Red 9. The Red 9 is my go-to gun. The second I get that gun, I start pouring all of my money into maxing it out. And it's just as good, just as reliable in this one. I love it. I was never a huge fan of the semi-auto sniper, but David had that one in his playthroughs.
I mean, you needed that gun for the regenerators in the original one, like because you get the heat scope, right?
It attaches to the bullet action.
So here's a fun fact about the heat scope in this one. You can attach it to any weapon that can carry a scope, and
That's
it
rad.
does not, and it doesn't necessarily confine to the bolt action or it doesn't confine to sniper rifles.
That's rad.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. You're gonna have a lot of fun, Greg. Like your playthrough might be different than mine and TJ's. I think their weapons all have different things, and some make aiming more precise, some give you greater power with sacrificing a little bit of precision, but it's what you would expect from RE4 Classic and then some.
What was there anything that they added that was new that you didn't like or didn't have that should have been in there? Like without going into spoiler territory, like that can be mechanics too, like in terms of like the organization of like your weapons, for example. Like, is that in there? Like the case.
I want to say that one of the funnest and most interesting mechanical things that they came across was with that thermal scope. In the original game, everybody knows that it was mostly used to kill regenerators because it was the only way to effectively see what the plagas inside of them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to not give it away, but I am going to say that thermal scope has a purpose beyond just killing regenerators in this game that became apparent to me on a whim in the late stages of the game.
Yeah, Greg, it's Resident Evil tradition that at least once you play as the secondary character, right? I think that this game has the best of those sections. Like, it's super fun. It was one of my favorite parts of the game. It's terrifying. Like it is scary. That's the thing too. Resident Evil 4 was more of a popcorn action flick, right? With like some horror elements, mostly the atmosphere. But this game really does a great job of balancing horror and action. Like just when you about feel overwhelmed from one, you get a palate cleanser from the other. It's the most balanced set of horror and action in any Resident Evil and any action survival horror game ever. I would say it's really, really well balanced.
I do remember in the original 4, that you did take the control of Ashley, and she had like some puzzle segments, and they didn't distract in the game, but like it was annoying not having a weapon, so you had to avoid, and there weren't that many enemies. You had to avoid like 1 or 2 enemies, and she would crawl and have like some puzzle she'd solve to open a gate to let Leon in. I'm assuming they have the same pacing there in terms of the remake.
Similar atmosphere, but without going into specifics, I think TJ and I loved it. I think you'll love it too. Like again, we were just talking about the pacing, the nice ebb and flow between horror and action, and just when you were about done in Ashley's section, you'll be ready for the palate cleanser that you get from the next Leon segment of the game. It's really, really well done. I didn't really care. Like, as much as I liked the last 2 remakes, I didn't really care for in RE2 Sherry's or Ada's section. I found them both tedious. This one really stands out to me as just great all around.
Yeah, I think it's any game that takes away like your progress, your weapons, and like your abilities, and swaps you with a different character temporarily, where like nothing you pick up is really going to be added to your inventory. Didn't it used to be though? Like, I remember, David will know this. In Resident Evil 2, if you like played scenario B and A and took weapons or something, like wouldn't they not be there for the other player when they're playing their playthrough? Or am I thinking of something else?
There was one weapon, like a big submachine gun, and then there was an ammo pack. So you could take both, but the idea was you wanted to take one and leave the other for the B.
Oh, that's right. He's like, I should leave this for Claire. I should leave this for Leon. Yeah, I remember the prompt. Okay, that's what I remember.
And that's something that was one of my issues with the RE2 remake. I didn't feel the second run, as they're called in that game, were nearly as interesting or diverse from the A content, your first run through. This game and RE3 remake are a lot more replayable. Like, I started professional mode this morning and I've already had to like stop myself from jumping back into it.
After both of you playing this game, can you guys talk about is there any fear about like having it go down the path that 5 was, where they started to lose focus? It was the same formula, but they were, 6 they lost focus completely, but 5 was starting with that bridge started to teeter.
Resident Evil 4 was always like the slow slip into a more action-oriented Resident Evil. I think that if they go into 5 with the level of polish and shifting and effort that they put into this remake, that they're on the right path. Because Resident Evil 4, Leon is a special agent. He's a secret agent. His job is to beat people up and save President Daughters.
He's gotta go. No one else can go but him.
That's on his resume and his job description. Beat people up, bullet point, save President's Daughters, other bullet point.
Qualification: survived zombie apocalypse in Raccoon City.
And like, so he's well trained, but like, the fact of the matter is the threat remains intensified and intensified and intensified to the point where from hour 1 to hour 24, I'm skimping to get the supplies I need to survive every new battle.
Yeah, you have to really fight for supplies more than you did in like the first playthrough of Resident Evil 4. In professional mode, I would gather, subsequent difficulties would be that even further, because that's how the original RE4 felt to me. I remember in RE4 Classic, I got to one of the last bosses in the game, did not have the ammo to beat him and had to restart. And there wasn't anything that harsh in this. It's very modernized without losing any of that hardcore fun factor that hardcore RE fans will appreciate. And yeah, I feel the same way as TJ. Like, one of the best parts about a remake to me is, you can go about it in one of two ways. You can stick as closely to the original game as possible, which Dead Space did earlier this year, and that game was great. Or you can look at what you feel you did best in that first game, or what maybe wasn't as strong as it could have been, and try to reimagine it. And I feel like RE4 does the latter. And it's actually kind of a nice dovetail with The Last of Us on HBO, and even The Walking Dead, right? Like, the creators of those, the game and the comic respectively, went into their TV adaptations going like, what would I have done differently here if given the chance, now that I've had time to think about it? And there are slight deviations. You'll see that here as well. And so I feel like if there is an RE5 remake, I'm with TJ. Like, Capcom sticks the landing. There is really, this game, I just had a smile on my face when I wasn't screaming. Even when I was screaming, which is a very odd mix from beginning to end. And so I feel like if there is an RE5, I'm here for it. An RE5 remake.
If there is no CD at the end of this game, I riot. I don't know if there is or not, but if there isn't, I riot. Oh, come on, where's the CD?
No comment.
One of the biggest questions that you guys probably won't be able to talk about, I still want to know, is, David, I constantly bring up Code Veronica because I want to put some perspective here on this cast, is that as a kid and a huge Resident Evil fan, Code Veronica came out in the Dreamcast. I couldn't afford a Dreamcast. None of my friends could afford a Dreamcast. So having that game out there and not being able to play it after being so enthralled with the story in 1 through 3, I know that game has a bad rap with all the stuff now. It does not hold up, but the coolest thing about that game to me was the fact that, like, you find out what happened to Wesker. Like, you thought he had died. He comes back. He's working for some pharmaceutical red. He has all these superpowers, and you're like, oh my god, like, how did this happen? And in the original 4, he comes back, but he's a very subtle role in 4. He's basically just communicating with Ada that game. He's in his little mastermind chair, being his mastermind self. Can I expect something like that in this, or do they just exit?
You're gonna have to find out on that one.
I have to play the game and find out. I like that answer.
Yeah. I think Resident Evil fans will be pleased with the fan service they get in all forms. There are all sorts of Easter eggs to future games. There's even like a wink and a nod to RE5 that I found, and to the past. And yeah, Greg, we'll have to have an extended Code Veronica conversation sometime. But I want to say, like, that I don't hate that game. Like, Claire's my favorite character, and I think all RE fans, by the time it came out, wanted a Chris and Claire, like, dynamic duo scenario, right? And so it would be cool to get that in a better game.
I also like the Prison Island setting. It's a very interesting setting for a zombie outbreak.
It is. I think that's one thing it did well too. But yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about that game's development was that it started as Resident Evil 3, but because it was taking so long, they took the Nemesis side project and were like, what if we just like add a 3? And everyone was like, yeah, that should be fine.
Yeah,
and
that's fine. Why not?
That happened. Kind of moving into wrapping this up, TJ, this is obviously Resident Evil 4 Remake is a huge game, but it's also now significant in the history of Shacknews because in our nearly 30 years, we've never given a game a 10 out of 10. But Resident Evil 4, you gave it a 10. And I wondered if you could just talk a bit about what a 10 out of 10 means to you and how you arrived at that score.
I've only ever given a 10 one other time in my history, and I built a sort of personal criteria for myself based on that experience. For a game to be a 10, I have to really work hard to find things to not like about it. And I am a master of nitpicking. I can find things to not like about anything if you give me enough time. And I did with this one, but the things that I found were so minuscule that, and a couple of them were adjustable to the point where they weren't problems. But like the aim in this game is a difficulty to me because you don't have the lasers on every gun. You have crosshairs, and you have to wait for a shot. You have to wait for the precision to line up, and then take your shot. And on some weapons, even then, sometimes there's a little bit of an RNG factor as to where the bullet will actually land. That can be adjusted by getting better equipment in the game, and it can be adjusted by options and accessibility. Aim assist and aim snapping are there, and so that is specifically at that point a qualm where I was just too stubborn to ask for assistance from the game.
Right.
The other thing is I saw when you pass, there's no loadings. There's not a lot of loading screens in this game except for when you complete a chapter. So when you pass through certain areas into other areas, the visual effects sort of catch up, and you'll sometimes see the game apply a new filter to the visuals of the area that you're in, and that was notable. That was noticeable sometimes. And then finally, I didn't really like the water effects in the lake. Those were not that great to me. They're a weirdly glaring issue in a game that is otherwise beautiful top to bottom.
So water effects in general, or just the lake specifically?
There's a specific fight that you'll see water effects are not great, at least on PS5.
Yeah, let me jump in here real quick, because you and I both felt that way. In fact, I got to it first, and I'm like, TJ, when you get to this fight, what do you think? And you were like, yeah, that kind of really stood out to me, because it's gorgeous otherwise. On the PC, I've played it a number of different settings. It's a little janky, but nowhere near as bad as on PS5, and I can assume Xbox Series X, but I don't know. So just a note there.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at, the bottom line on all of these, is that they were minuscule things that could be adjusted to be fixed, and ultimately were buried by everything else that the game was doing right constantly, and doing amazingly well. And to that point, not only were my nitpicks, they were buried by better parts of the game on a regular basis, to the point where I couldn't even be mad about them for more than a couple seconds beyond noticing that they existed. And that is what makes this a 10. I had to fight to find things that I could even say, well, this is a thing that they should have maybe done better. But it was buried by, this is something that they did awesome on a regular basis. On a regular basis.
I mean, I agree. The way TJ and I looked at this, Greg, is Capcom had to find it very daunting to not only remake a beloved Resident Evil game, but one of the most beloved games and one of the most important games of all time. They could have just remade this one-to-one within the RE engine and shipped it, and a lot of people would have been like, oh, cool, an updated, basically a remastered game rather than a remake. But the fact that they went above and beyond and dared to make some of the changes that they did just shows that they were up to the challenge and the commitment they had to do this. It is just, I have some of the same nitpicks as TJ, but to me, I had to struggle to find them, and it's just phenomenal from top to bottom. I don't think I'll go back to RE4 Classic, which is something I've replayed almost every 12 to 18 months without fail. I don't see any reason to go back to it, and this game is just that phenomenal.
If they stick the landing on the VR mode, and if that is as fun to play, or at least close to as fun to play as RE4 VR, I'm not going to be able to vote for any other game for Game of the Year. There's just no way I can go about it. It's just not going to be possible for me.
Do you see that? Is that mode supposed to ship this year? Or is that something we could see?
It's going to be this year. It's going to be a free DLC update after launch.
Wow. Okay,
Free.
I'm gonna have to go to PR2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that does it. We wanted to treat everyone to kind of inside baseball discussion of RE4 Remake, just with three of the biggest fans of the Resident Evil franchise here. Make sure to go to shacknews.com, read TJ Denzer's full review on Friday, March 17th, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
My PC impressions will be up. We'll have even more Resident Evil 4 content in the weeks to come. A lot more discussion about this game and other games throughout the year. And of course, you're watching this on YouTube, so follow Shacknews on YouTube. Look for even more gaming videos, RE4 videos to come. And we will see you later, strangers.